Hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about something that I find super interesting, and that's that whole avenue of synthetic or acquisitional growth. But more specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about why do so many acquisitions fail. So that's what I am going to take you through today. So going into to a bit more detail about what we are going to cover, we are talking about a setup in Denmark, at least, where that's the focus of what we're going to talk about today, where the number of transactions have increased quite a lot. So something happened in 2020 where a little thing called COVID entered our market, and since then the number of transactions have skyrocketed in the Danish transaction scene. But that's not the only thing that has happened. At the same time, with the number of transactions going through the roof, we also saw that the actual transaction price or the ticket size went down. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic because what we have seen both prior, but especially after this case, is that investors, they report that 70 to 90% of all of these acquisitions, they actually fail to meet their investment thesis, which in essence means that they did not meet the requirements that they sought out to when they were looking to acquire this target. So what are these, when we say failed, what is actually that? It's either one of these four, that they did not actually meet their financial goal, so they didn't deliver the revenue that they intended to deliver. They didn't do it in the right time. They didn't really enable themselves to acquire this company and lump it into the organization and ramp up in the given time. It didn't really give the capability boost that they were looking for. They didn't acquire that competence that they were looking to get from an outside point of view. And lastly, that the synergies that were set up to be the main reason why we acquired this company didn't actually go in. So 70 to 90%, that's quite a lot. That's not really something that's not the good odds if you're looking to enter acquisitional growth. So the main question is there something that we can actually do about it? Is there something that we as companies can do? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So why is this happening? We're going to look at the different targets and different types of targets and reasons to engage in M&A, and also the different diagnostics needed to actually set yourself up for success. And then we're going to talk about the structured approach, so that we can tip the odds in our favor and not be a part of the 70 to 90%, but hopefully be a part of the 30 to 10%. And over time, if everything goes well, hopefully skew that measure a little bit so it's not that vast. So that's the idea and what we're going to talk about today. My name is Sixten Schulz, and I'm a partner here at Quadrant Consulting, and I lead our transaction services practice, which in essence is where we help companies from everything from defining why should we look at acquisitional growth, to identifying target companies, to helping with the transaction, to making sure value realization happens, and also if you're in a situation where you need to spin off a part of the company at a later stage, help with finding the right partners to actually acquire that and do vendor due diligence. So first of all, what we need to discuss is have a bit of a look at why do acquisitions actually fail. For me at least, before we go into this, I've also tried to buy a couple of companies in my time in the previous job, and I want to take you back to a point in time where I sat in Finland in a sauna, where that was kind of where we met up all the executive management of the company I worked in, but also the acquiring part. And upon looking there, we said we just celebrated, very nice. We acquired a company, and now it was time to, where all of the hopes were high and time to realize the benefits. I kind of started to wonder if we did the right thing in this setup. And one of the key questions that I was already starting to feel there some tickling around actually ended up materializing. So the acquisition at least wasn't a success. It didn't materialize into the revenue stream we had intended to, and it really didn't get to the point where we thought we wanted to go. So I thought that there was kind of three questions that mainly resonated with me, and three things we should have been able to answer, which we wasn't at that point. So first of all, for the company that I was in at the time, what was actually the strategic rationale? Why did we want to acquire this company? How did we envision that this should give us a competitive advantage going forward? And secondly, the question two, I think we missed the mark on, is to really understand and analyze. So you're buying this company, adding that to a mother company. How is this supposed to fit together, both in terms of cultural aspects, ways of working? How do we sell? Do we leverage our different positions in the two different geographies, and what does it take actually to make this happen? Which kind of is a good caveat to the third question that we didn't really had asked ourselves at that point in time. What is the plan for integrating the company? How will we make sure that we build those synergies and those accelerators by collaborating and taking what is good from our side, and don't overrule or overrumple the target company? And then maybe last important, what happens if we didn't succeed to do that? This is not just questions that I wished we had an answer to back in that day. It's actually something that is quite common in many companies. And looking at some of the data, there are some important points. So first of all, what's the strategic reasoning? So when we look at the data and when we ask executives, it's only like less than a quarter of SMEs that has a formal M&A strategy in place. It's not really something that they talk about. It's not something that they're working with. It's not a document that is there. It's something that might be in the head of a single executive or two, but it's not something that is formalized, put into place, vetted, and tested. Secondarily, we also see that there isn't really done any market research when we are entering in acquisitions. So 45% of failed acquisitions that can be directly attributed to inadequate market research and understanding of the target's position or how it operates. It simply isn't deep enough the way we're looking at our targets. In terms of the second company, how does this, or second question, how does the target company fit into the potential acquiree? Some of the things that we see in the market is that there's typically a reactive approach that we're taking. So acquisitions, they are kind of evaluated at the time where they present themselves. So there isn't a proactive measure, and that kind of results in having a very narrow focus and don't take the whole opportunity space into calculation. So every time you have a target or an acquisition in mind, there's always an alternative cost or an alternative target that we need to benchmark up against. Lastly, we can also, secondarily, we can see that there's limited analysis actually done in these acquisitions. So from the European Commission, when they look at the acquisitional growth, they indicate that 60% of M&A failures in the small and middle-sized segment is attributed to simply insufficient due diligence and assessment of the target. So essentially, you end up two executives, then you agree that this might be a good idea. That isn't the proper vetting. There isn't the proper analysis of the revenue dynamics, the ways of working, the financial performance, all of that is needed to bring comfort, and also figuring out how does this actually interact together. In terms of these integration plans, most of the time when we are finalizing an acquisition in this SME segment, we don't really have a value realization plan. And that's a key component, because an acquisition is really just the beginning of the battle. Actually realizing the investment thesis requires stringent planning, and it requires a project in itself where you're actually working towards making sure that that companies work together and you can derive the efficiencies that you're looking for. And then maybe my pet peeve, and one of, I think, the most important aspects, there's no kill switches. So companies typically become pod committed either in an acquisition target or when they have bought it in a new opportunity where, sorry, they get so focused on making sure that this happens and realizes that they don't really, they're not aware of the alternative cost and all of the effort, all of the focus that this one project, one acquisition, one target drains out of the organization. That cost far outweighs the benefit. And there's no formal structure in place to say, okay, enough is enough. We need to leave this on the table and go in another direction. So no kill switches are in place. So in essence, what I realized sitting back in that sauna is something that a lot of companies are struggling with, and that's what we want to open up a little bit. So, if I were to sit in Helsinki in that sauna today, what I would have done different, and what I suggest that everybody is doing, is that they are pretty diligent about answering these questions. So first of all, in order to answer the first one, we do need an acquisition strategy that is formulated and that is aligned across the leadership, so we know exactly what we're buying, why we're buying, and how we intend that process to look. Secondarily, how the company fits into the mother organization is super important to analyze. And where I would have wanted to do this analysis is to look at the different components of our go-to-market system, everything from product to channel and distribution strategies to the customer base. What changes and what changes do we need to make as a mother and as an acquired company to our day-to-day operation to make sure that we have one single way of working and a single go-to-market platform that accelerates both. Lastly, another thing that I would have made sure to incorporate is this value realization plan. So making sure that we at all times have a very formulated plan on how do we envision, what tangible initiatives do we need to have in place in order to support this move from being two separate unities to being one stronger unit. And for me, a lot of this is actually components that needs to go into the due diligence or the commercial due diligence as a way of analyzing, getting an outside perspective about how does each of these questions, each of these components inform our decision to move forward as a company. Different like targets and the underlying acquisition strategy requires different diagnostics, because an acquisition is not just an acquisition. There's different ways that we are trying to extract value from synthetic growth. So most of you that have been at school and so on have talked about vertical and horizontal integration of companies and so on. I'm going to elaborate a little bit because I think this is a little bit too simplistic view of acquisition focuses and strategies. But in essence, like when we're talking about a vertical acquisition, whether that's securing supply chains or cost or production, or horizontal where we get access to new markets or buy up competition and so on, the question for me that is most important is that do we really have, in each of these cases, if it's vertical or horizontal, is the prescription, is the analysis, is the key success criteria, is that really the same for that? Should we have the same approach? And I think that is pretty evident that no, we don't. So we can take that learning and spill into what I at least have as three main buckets of acquisitional growth and say, how do we actually analyze that? So I have three archetypical strategies that I at least see out there. There's the one, the supporting the existing business. So essentially, that is where you are acquiring to scale what you're doing today, or do what you're doing today a bit better. That's typically where we're looking to increase market share, where we need to get cost reductions from efficiencies, where we are trying to get new products in our portfolio. Very classical acquisitional growth. Then in the second category, or second bucket, I see this and by extending the businesses, so adding to the portfolio. So this is new products, new services, new capabilities that you need to acquire. It might be that you realize that it's that you need to sell enterprise level software, but you don't really have the sales force to do that. So instead of building from scratch, you can acquire a similar company with an established sales force, so you can bolt that onto your existing solution and hopefully also get some product synergies. But that's essentially where you can extend the business, the current business, into new areas. Lastly, the third one is where you kind of changing the fundamental business, and not many companies are looking in that bucket, but sometimes it can be that you, if you are a conglomerate, you need to reduce your exposure to certain industries, so you need to add the diversification, or you kind of need to pivot your business model so fundamentally that that pivot can be short circuited a little bit by acquiring another company. Within each of these, I think there are some typical, archetypical acquisitions. So within the support and grow existing businesses, it's the classical roll-up. So acquire a direct competitor, making sure you build competitive advantages. There's also the whole consolidation play. So making sure that you kind of support or control the supply by making sure you're limiting the number of outlets in the market. Also a typical strategy that we see. It can be that you acquire companies to drive operational excellence, so have special capabilities that you want to buy in order to strengthen your performance in the market. Or it can also be to accelerate access. So it can be either in the same industry, but or new geographies where you can actually get a foothold in a new market where you don't really have a current position. You can also extend the business, and that can be by entering adjacencies. So that can be by having a new product. It can be by an different service line, but something that is closely adjacent to your core business, but adding that to increase your offering and also to increase your impact. It can be that you want to make sure that you want to have a new higher margin or growth industry where you are creating essentially a new business leg. You have a product, but you don't have a service line, so you can buy up the service company to have an adjacent operations and a new leg. Or you can also use this as a kind of an R&D investment. So instead of, if you're a product company, instead of investing heavily in research and development and making sure that or having a time to market that may be years ahead, you can find acquisition targets that are already kind of on that journey and save you a couple of years and actually buy in that R&D to make sure that you can have a shorter time to market. And it is a way to reroute your R&D cost into acquisitions that can save you a lot of time. The last part of this is changing the fundamental business. So it's not relevant for most, but basically it is buying an unrelated company that is not within your core, where you kind of pivot and reallocate the resources you had in your core into the new business to enter a high margin growth, or you can have a conglomerate or a diversification acquisition. From all of these different acquisition strategies or acquisition routes, I think the key thing that I would advocate, and that I hope you guys take away, is that no matter the different acquisition strategy you're pursuing or the reasons why, what you want to achieve, all of these approaches, they require a fundamentally different approach, a fundamentally different due diligence, and a fundamentally different process design in order to succeed. And what we cannot really rely on is prescribing the same approach for everything or taking this too lightly. Because as we saw in the beginning of the presentation, those 70 to 90% that fail, it's also the 70 to 90% that doesn't take the analysis and the preparation seriously enough. And far too often, and especially for SMEs, acquisitions become opportunistic. It doesn't become a purposeful motion of growth that can, and for many does, actually provide very, very good growth acceleration over time. So what we're going to talk about here is then also looking at at how can we put the odds in our favor, and what should we actually do? What should be the contents of this preparation? And what I would like to present is like an approach or some considerations needed to make in terms of adding odds in our favor. So we talked about the analysis and a proper due diligence, and for me at least, I think that this is a key component in succeeding in everything. So, but a commercial due diligence can be many things, and I think one of the key key pitfalls here is to be reliant on doing only spreadsheet analysis and not actually getting into the weeds and have an operationally solid analysis. But there are some different components that I think is important. So we need to understand the market, and the market not as an aggregated macro market, but what is the underlying segments that the acquisitional target is working in. What is the size? What is the trends? What is the risks? How will this evolve over time? It might be that you're in an IT consultancy business and you kind of want to enter this whole AI stuff. That's not the same market. That's not just IT consultancy. You need to be able to break that down to understand the underlying sub-markets and sub-segments and where we're working, where do we play in both the mother and the target organization. We also need to make sure that we're looking at competition and the competing offerings and the positions of the competition within those subsegments. That's back to this alternative cost. It might be that you're actually looking at the wrong target and there's a company just next to it or one of its competitions that are much better positioned for growth, that have better capabilities, better value propositions, are better fit for your organization. So looking at the competitive landscape is super crucial, both to evaluate performance, but also goodness of fit for you as an acquiring part. Third, I always want to look at the customers of the target. So what is the composition? What is the segments that are buying? What's the size? What's the of the projects and deals? What's the lifetime value of each engagement? Are we good at growing our customers? Is it basically a transactional product? So what is the characteristics of the customer relationships? What is the characteristics of the deals that we have with the customers, and also evaluate what is the overlap and are there certain exposures to compliance or single large clients that we need to be aware of before we enter this deal. Then also looking at the whole revenue infrastructure or the channels. So how do we take our products or services to market? What is the channel strategy? How strong are we in our physical sales force? How strong is our digital offering? How do we work with marketing activities? What is the whole motion of bringing the product to market? Super important also because we might have to look at how does this fit into the company that we are on the acquiring part, and is there efficiencies to be found here. And lastly, I think the whole growth ability is an important analysis. So looking fundamentally at your own business, saying if we get these capabilities and this ammunition from this acquisition targets within our portfolio, how will we together grow? What is the path that we believe in? Is it just by scale? Is it where do we think that the money will come from? And really test the feasibility of those theses, because most of the time, just adding for scale is not really the growth path that you want to do. You need to be much more granular and figure out how will I derive value out of this new entity that we're building. And if that is not significantly better with a significantly lower risk, then we really need to challenge ourselves to, is this worthwhile doing? Of course, the commercial aspect is doesn't stand alone. We typically in an acquisition process, you also need to look at both the financial, the legal aspect. It can be technical due diligence. It can be product due diligence or supply chain that you want to ensure, double down on, ESG, you name it. So there's many venues that needs to be looked upon, and it's not that they're separate animals. These analyses all live in a symbiotic relationship and kind of informs each other to give more and more of a granulated picture about what are we actually looking into here. And I think while they're super important, all of them, both to cover risk and making sure that the numbers are in place and how is the product sewn together. But I think an important part, and what I'll come back to in a little later in the presentation, is that one of the key reasons that we fail to meet those financial targets, being on time and deriving synergies, it is that we don't have enough visibility and transparency into how will we realize it, what needs to be done from a commercial perspective, and commercialization being one of the key cornerstones. I wouldn't underplay the importance of that in an acquisition process. So what essentially is it then all about? So essentially what we want to make sure that you cover from all of these models from due diligence is that we need to understand how does the market look, what is the competitive and the trends. We also want to look at the acquisition target, their capabilities, their customers, and their growth to assess, okay, what is the market value, what is the potential, and how likely is it that we can capitalize that potential. So if anything, like that should be the focus on figuring out what is our exposure to the market and how are we able to grow within this setup. I talked a bit about the growth paths, and back to the components on how will this materialize. I think it's an important analysis to make sure that we look at the go-to-market system. So looking at products, what will change if I acquire this company? Is there any additions? Is there any limitations? How am I going to map it? Is it just a perfect Lego brick fit, or do we need to prune part of our product or service offering? How will this coexist? We also need to understand how we sell it. So with that new product portfolio, or it can be unchanged portfolio, how do we leverage our channels? How do we sell it? How do we go to market? What's digital? What's physical? What's sales? What's marketing? What's business development? Do we need an SDR function? All of that needs to be in place so we can paint a clear picture about what is the channel strategy that will make sure that we are deriving the revenue potential that we want to achieve. And lastly, also making sure that we understand who do we sell to. So what is the right customer segments? Who are we focusing? Are there changes based on the new product offering or the new channel strategy? Do we have an in with new customers? And making sure that we're evaluating how will this look. So we are not just creating two separate businesses that work off the same CVR number, but that we're creating a unified new company that is able to accelerate even further. And that, I think, is a key component, and where I see a lot of due diligence or acquisitions not have the commercial depth that they need, is to have a stringent look at the go-to-market system and the implications of a potential acquisition. One thing that I would really truly hope that I can beg of you guys is that a due diligence is not just on internal data or anecdotal evidence. Too often, and I've myself been a victim of that fallacy, is thinking that we know all of our customers and we know all of the actors on the market, and we can kind of estimate it based on our own exposure. An acquisition is a very, very healthy point in time to maybe take a pause and move yourself out of your daily operations and take an outside-in look at the fit and what is actually happening in the market. So please please add some sort of external data, external analysis to your setup, not just looking at your own CRM system and not just looking at a couple of people internally. Make sure you get the 10,000 foot perspective on this setup. Not that this is just from my last 10 years of working. This is a source of a lot of failure, at least. Looking at, okay, an acquisition happened. We're happy we brought all together. That's only really half the battle, or even less potentially, because we do see 4 main drivers when asking back at the data, the 70% that didn't really meet their investment thesis. So what happened? And 4 important pillars here. So one being the cultural integration. Cultural integration is not just the values that you have on the wall and making sure that they are aligned, but the cultural integration is taking care of the ways of working, the ways of collaborating. How do we actually fuel the engine that is our everyday life, and how well fit are those together? Far too often it's an afterthought to figure out how will we enable new ways of working or adapt to one of the actors' way of working, and that leads to a lot of inefficiencies and misunderstandings. It also creates employee missatisfaction, and often it is very, very important that we are clearly communicating what needs to happen, how are we going to do that, and get people on board. Come back to that in a little time. Secondarily, the operational integration. So I think I did a presentation a couple of months ago about how many companies that has more than 10 people has a CRM system and an ERP system, and it is 95 or 96%. That's just one piece of the puzzle, but making sure that the systems, processes, technologies, and so on are in place, and that these are aligned into this new single entity instead of being 2 separate companies. It can be complex, it can be time-consuming, but it is a source of frustration and also a source of missed opportunities and missed business if not taken into consideration at an early point in time. Thirdly, also, and I think this might be a source of the first 2 is talent retention. So being able to keep people on board. It's crucial, but one thing that I would challenge in this is that it's not just about key personnel. It's also about making sure that you are. It is about key personnel, but looking at key personnel in a bit more granulated lens. And typically, it's like, okay, we need the founder and the sales manager, and that's the key personnel. But a sales manager without sellers and a way of actually displaying his or her way of working isn't really able to perform. So talent retention should be a wall-to-wall exercise of figuring out who actually drives the revenue and the business of this company, who drives the relationships, and that is typically a bit wider group of people than what we end up securing. And also talent retention most of the time isn't a contractual thing. It's not that you have your golden handcuffs being with the new company for a certain period of time. It's also a cultural, managerial, day-to-day exercise of making sure that the new single entity is embracing a new culture that is part mother and part target. So we are building the new future together. Fourth is the realizing of synergies. So all of the good things that we had in our spreadsheets with, and then we can cut our cost to this, and we're able to add this new top line revenue. All of the time, it never materializes, and it's often much more complicated than expected. So mostly also because it's not supported in a structured manner from the time of acquisition to the time of operation, and the expectation is that you can more or less overnight deliver at a new plateau, which is never the case. So managing that change, managing how we're going to actually fulfill the full potential is a key aspect of realizing these synergies. Looking at these 4 main drivers of acquisitional loss, the executives in this study by BCG were also asked, so Is it because we have implemented stuff too fast or too slow, or I don't know? And the very, very overarching response is that most companies, they are reacting too slow. This is also because it becomes an afterthought, and we don't have the plans for the cultural integration. How are we realizing synergies? What's the plans? What's the value realization plan? How will we keep employees? What systems to take precedence? How will we migrate from one master data system to another? That's an afterthought. It's something we figure out at the back of the acquisition. But the hard numbers is that most of the time, why we are not hitting those investment theses are because we're not acting fast enough. Change that is dragged out over too long a time, it becomes ineffective. It doesn't become a motion that will drive the company forward. And looking at that data, I think it's evident that if we are to take a key takeaway here, it would be to drive the post-acquisition initiatives, the PMI process, way faster than what we are at least currently doing in the SME segment today. So what do you need to do? How can you actually support this? So I think an important aspect about your role in supporting the organization and the C-suite is to wear many different hats to actually support these four main pitfalls of PMI failure. One being being a change facilitator. So really taking change management seriously, making sure that everything is communicated and transparent, that you take seriously the journey between being a single company to this new reality, and over-inform, over-support, communicate the entire organization, because it is a super vulnerable period, the time after an acquisition. It's also about having the head as a strategic planner. Most of the time, there's a lot to do just in the operations of a traditional company. I don't think I've met a lot of C-suites that are just sitting on their hands and waiting for what to do. So adding to that burden a lot of important initiatives to be able to that is needed in order to drive acquisitional success is typically on top of that. And most of the time we become disfocused by having too many things on our plate. I think at least an advice for C-suites is to make sure that we focus on the few important tasks rather than everything at once, and make sure that there is a structured plan of how will we eat this elephant bite by bite, instead of becoming spread too thin and doing a lot of things half-assed. There's also a hat being the spreadsheet policeman. So making sure, and that's kind of back to having a few focal initiatives, but also making sure that we're progressing on them. So follow up. Most of the time it will not be a job that is only nested in the C-suite. There will be a project organization that will drive these initiatives. But be curious. Don't take it for granted that things are progressing. Ensure progress. Have weekly check-ins. Make sure that you're reporting on these initiatives across the management and even to the board, to make sure that it is visible and we take this process and this cadence of implementing seriously. Then, and this is again my pet peeve, and where I think this is one of the main things that I would advocate everybody to have, is being the Grim Reaper. So making sure that you have the guts to kill acquisitions or plans or projects that doesn't really live up to the investment thesis. The alternative cost of overcommitting to an acquisition is far too much compared to the potential value of pushing that far down the line. Just as an example, I've been a part of acquiring a company that have now existed for 8 years, and I think just started as a separate business unit to deliver black numbers. It's been in the red for 8 years, and for those 8 years, it's taking out effort, it's taking out attention from management, it's taking out cost, and the time to repay that, compared to if we had killed it in year 1 and then focused on a new acquisition, is a business case that doesn't add up. So really remember to be aggressive and kill stuff that doesn't really work out or function in due time. So for me, if I went back to the sauna and I knew back then, these 12 years ago, what I had known now, what would be my key takeaways? What would be the main things that I would focus on in endeavoring in this acquisitional growth as part of a C-suite? So one, I would notice or recognize that a lot of acquisitions fail. Acquisitions cannot be a all eggs in one basket approach, and there is a reason why professional and institutional investors, they are looking at an investment portfolio and not as a one-trick pony. Acquisitions can fail, and that's a calculated risk that we need to take into our everyday when we're looking to synthetic growth. I would also take into the consideration the three questions again. I would really have done or challenge the rest of the management to look at the acquisition strategy and think, why are we buying this? I would really evaluate the go-to-market system and figuring out how will this acquisition impact us. And I would also insist on having a value realization plan to figure out how we're going to actually make this possible. I would have looked at this value potential from a much more narrow frame. I wouldn't have looked at, okay, this company is kind of similar to us, but in another geography. Let's bolt it on and see what happens. I would have gone much more granulated into the sub-markets and the underlying trends to see what is the actual underlying service offering, and not looking at it from a too high level. And lastly, I would have made sure that we followed up on the acquisition. So instead of acquiring and then leave it to have its own life and being managed by some loose frames that we agreed upon, I would make sure that we had this hypercare period of supporting the integration and making this not just another business unit that can live its own life, but making sure that it was an integrated part of the company that we were driving at the time, and making sure that we were able to support that from a global point of view instead of leaving it to rest. I hope that this gave you some insights into how at least you can look at acquisitions, and how I at least think you should challenge yourself to look at it a bit differently and not rely on too light analysis when you're working with acquisitions. We do have some time for a few questions here before we round off. So I'll open up the floor, and you're able to use the chat to write some questions. I have one here. Why do most companies fail? I think in acquisitions, from my point of view, it's inadequate preparation, and it's an inadequate risk view when you are entering a deal. So looking at both the post-merger challenges and the data we looked at now, it's inadequate preparation, and it's inadequate analysis, and it's an overly opportunistic approach to acquisitions. There is a reason why this is an entire industry on its own, and it's not something to be taken lightly. So in my point of view, most companies fail because they have inadequate or opportunistic approaches to acquisition in the SME market. Check. When do you know that you should abandon an acquisition? It's a very difficult thing to abandon a whole acquisition in general. And I think what we see at most executives and boards is that you become pot committed, you become committed to the success of this company, and your willingness to stretch is continuously extending. So we have this hyperbolic discounting where we say, just another quarter, or yeah, but next quarter it will be better, or next half year, and then all of a sudden you wake up and then you're looking at the same company 5 years later, like I did with one of the acquisitions I was involved with, and it never really materialized. So for me, a part of the decision to invest should also be, what are the core criteria that needs to be true at a given point in time, a year, maybe a year and a half after, to say what are the indicators, both leading and lagging indicators, that needs to be true before this is something that we pursue. And then having an agreement in the deal team where we say, do we all agree that this is what needs to materialize, and hold that document holy. It shouldn't be stretch targets. It should be what is needed for this to still be a good idea for us, and then act on it. Because where you are before you've put money on the table, emotionally and mentally, is another place than where you are a year down the line. So I would kind of be pretty cutthroat about those plans, having kill switches already defined up front before you go into an acquisition, because otherwise you become emotionally attached and pot committed over time. I think I have time for maybe one more. No, but then I would just like to say thank you to everybody viewing, and I hope you got something out of this presentation. You are more than welcome to reach out if you have any questions or comments. Otherwise, have a very nice day. Thank you.